Guys, I'm happy to welcome to the podcast Kash Patel. He was commissioned as a deputy assistant to President Trump, senior director for counterterrorism on the National Security Council. He went on to serve as deputy director of national intelligence and then chief of staff for the Department of Defense. By the way, Kash has a new book out. It's a children's book, and we're going to be talking about that in the second segment. We'll get to that. In fact, that's a book that also involves 2,000 mules, I'm happy to say. But Kash, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. I thought we'd spend the first segment talking a little bit about the FBI, the deep state, and some of the latest revelations involving this guy Danchenko. Now, for many people, after a while, these names become a little bit of a blur. It's a little difficult to keep track, but you keep track. So can you tell us who Danchenko is and tell us the significance of what the latest revelations about him are?
Absolutely. And Dinesh, thanks so much for having me. Thank you to Debbie for setting this all up. Greatly appreciate the time. So as my time as a, national security prosecutor and then, formerly as Devin Nunes' chief investigator, I guess I spend many of my days delving deep into this world. So what you have is some of the things that I just revealed this past week. I call it the confidential human source corruption cover-up network. And you and I both know that the FBI is supposed to use confidential human sources in tough cases. That's lawful. It's ethical, unless they do it unlawfully and unethically. And what I've been saying since the entry of Christopher Steele, and we all know his history for making up a totally false document and then hijacking the law enforcement community with the assistance of the Democratic National Party and Hillary and lying to a federal court just to get surveillance. That is the definition of using a confidential human source to cover up the government's corruption. So now we extend that to, what Durham just was issuing in pleadings in federal court against this guy called Danchenko over the last week or two, and his trial's coming up. So John Durham is prosecuting Christopher Steele's number one source for the Steele dossier. And what has come out as a result of our investigations and all the great work everybody's been doing is that Danchenko told the FBI when Steele was making his dossier that it was barroom banter, that he made it up and gave it to him over beers, literally in a tavern in the United Kingdom or elsewhere. But the FBI went with it anyway. Here's the part that even floored me, though, Dinesh. Out of all the work I used to do and revealing this matter and putting out the largest criminal conspiracy that I call the FBI has ever perpetrated, after we showed Christopher Steele to have lied about his involvement and the FBI fired him, the next month, and I'm talking wind the clock back to 2017, Christopher Steele's fired. The next month, the FBI goes and hires Danchenko to be a confidential human source. And that is just some of the most outrageous conduct I've ever heard. They did it with one reasoning. They knew that Danchenko material to Steele was bupkis. They knew Steele put false information to the FBI, but they thought, let's use American taxpayer dollars and pay Danchenko for 3 years. 3 years he was on the FBI payroll as a confidential human source. And here's the reason why. Simply, once you have a confidential human source, the FBI is allowed to tell everyone, we can't jeopardize our sources and methods. We can't tell you Congress even about this investigation. Remember, Devin Nunes and I sent something like 15 subpoenas out for this information, and we were stonewalled and lied to by Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray.
Now, I'm trying to figure out here the role of the FBI and the deep state because Durham is prosecuting Danchenko for lying to the FBI. And you mentioned that Christopher Steele and Danchenko seemingly together came up with this sort of fabricated material, this fabricated story. But you said that the FBI also knew that this was barroom banter. So my question is, how do you lie to someone who you may say wants to be lied to, or is in fact soliciting those lies so that they can use those lies to go get an get a FISA warrant? I'm trying to figure out what the meaning of lying is when you basically got bad guys at both ends of the deal.
And that's just it. I think that's a great way to look at it. Normally in government, especially in service to this country in law enforcement or national security matters, you have individuals who sign up to serve the mission, not a political agenda. But what happens was the deep state and government gangsters, as I call them, the likes of Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, and all these other individuals now that we're learning their names, Heidi and Auten and so forth, they were so anti Trump or the MAGA movement or the America First movement, that they were willing to jeopardize and break their oaths of office and break the law in order to get false information from shoddy sources, pay them, and then funnel that into the FISA court stream to lie to a federal judge. They partnered with like-minded individuals. That's the thing. Christopher Steele, it's public now. He hated Donald Trump. He literally said, I will do anything to make sure he's not elected. They had that thread in common, and they saw Donald Trump as the biggest threat for whatever reason to the constitutional democracy. And here's the thing that always catches government gangsters. It's their arrogance. They thought, all these people that we just talked about, they thought no one's ever going to catch us. So we will document everything ourselves and put it in a vault and no one will ever see it. And we caught them. And the documents have slowly started to come out. And that's the best way to educate, I think, the American public on the corruption that's at the FBI. And that's what John Durham is revealing. Even to a guy like me, 4 or 5 years later, I'm still learning a whole swath of new information from John Durham's prosecution of Danchenko.
Wow, this is fascinating. I mean, knowledge is certainly the first step. I mean, I would think that action is the second, and I'm certainly hoping Republicans are paying careful attention to all this as we go to the midterms. Kash, let's take a pause. When we come back, let's talk about your new book, your children's book, The Plot Against the King 2, and it's subtitled 2,000 Mules. We'll be right back.